First, I'll clear up some common misconceptions about Bitcoin. The only people who get to decide the rules of the Bitcoin protocol are the people who receive Bitcoin in exchange for something else. No one else has any hard power. When push comes to shove, the only people who matter are the people who receive Bitcoin as payment. If you're receiving Bitcoin in exchange for something else, you don't want those coins to disappear from your wallet after you've handed over whatever you're selling or trading. This means you want the transaction to be immutable. Miners provide this immutability as a service. When someone sends you some Bitcoin, they pay a transaction fee because otherwise miners will not put that transaction into a block and you won't provide the product or service. When you receive Bitcoin in exchange for something else, you're the end consumer of this immutability service. The transaction sender can be seen as a middleman, paying the transaction fee on your behalf. If they don't pay enough fee, or they pay a miner who's using a variant of the protocol that you don't like, then your wallet doesn't deem this to be valid Bitcoin. A lot of people seem to think that simply running a Bitcoin node somehow helps secure the network. It doesn't. You can run as many nodes as you want. You can run 1 million nodes with previous versions of the Bitcoin protocol. It doesn't change anything. Whoever is receiving Bitcoin doesn't care how many nodes you have or what version of Bitcoin it's running. The only thing they care about is validating the Bitcoin that they receive, and they validate it against whatever version of the protocol they decide to call Bitcoin. Developers can change whatever they want, but the people who decide if those changes are valid or not is whoever's receiving Bitcoin as payment. Hodlers, who are holders, have even less power. Actually, they have no power whatsoever. If you have some Bitcoin and you lose your private keys, that Bitcoin is gone forever. There's nothing you can do. If you lose your private keys, you simply don't have any Bitcoin anymore. You're no longer a Bitcoin holder. So what happens if you don't lose your private keys? What's the difference between having your private keys and not having them? The only difference it makes is that you can spend those coins. This doesn't give you any power. When you go to a shop to buy something with cash, the salesperson decides if that cash is real or a forgery. It's not up to you. It's the same with Bitcoin. The receiving party decides. As an example, if you hold Bitcoin SV and you decide you want to use this to buy something, but the seller thinks it's a shitcoin, they don't want it, there's nothing you can do about it. They decide what Bitcoin is, not you. Bitcoin operates as an immutable transaction marketplace. Miners provide immutability as a service. Receivers of Bitcoin consume this service and pay for it with inflation as well as transaction fees via the transaction sender. Inflation is fixed, of course, so the receivers of Bitcoin actually decide the amount of inflation. People who send Bitcoin transactions to pay for something only pay a fee because if they don't, then the miner won't put that transaction into a block, as I said before, and the receiver won't validate it. The sender can decide to pay a mining fee to miners who follow a different protocol, but if the receiver doesn't like it, the receiver won't recognize it as Bitcoin. So now that you know who controls the Bitcoin protocol, let's have a look at what states want from the monetary system and why Bitcoin is completely at odds with this. The state wants to be able to print money. And when I talk about the state, I'm talking about banks too, because banks and the state are intrinsically linked together. Either explicitly, like with central banks, or implicitly, like in Hong Kong. Bitcoin it provides separation of state and money. The existing system doesn't have this separation. The state wants to track your income and expenditure so that they can maximize their tax revenue. If they can't track your transactions, they can't prove that you owe them any tax. This is what the AML and KYC laws are for. The state also wants to be able to stop you from transferring money out of the country during trade wars or economic collapse. In any case, they want to have this capability ready to use if they need it. Think about what the actual benefits of Bitcoin are. What benefits does Bitcoin have over PayPal or Visa or your bank account? Well, it can't be printed. The currency itself can't be arbitrarily printed. If you have savings in Bitcoin and there's a bank collapse, the government can't inflate the currency and devalue your savings to bail out their banker friends. It's permissionless. You don't need to go to some authority during business hours to prove that you're not a criminal. You just create a new public-private key pair and you're ready to go. No one can stop you from making a transaction. Transacting locally or cross-border is exactly the same thing. All these advantages of Bitcoin that go beyond the existing system are there because it's not controlled by the state. If the state controlled Bitcoin, they could print it. If the state controlled Bitcoin, you'd need permission to use it. If the state controlled Bitcoin, they can stop you sending money overseas to accounts that are not verified as being within your own country. If Bitcoin didn't have these benefits, it would be no different to any other payment service. It would immediately lose its edge over the existing services and provide nothing extra. And Bitcoin is designed with only one adversary in mind, the state. Remember that the only real participants in the Bitcoin network are miners and receivers. They are participating in a market. It's a market for immutable transactions. The adversary is whoever is motivated to attack the market itself. If Bitcoin becomes adopted by the masses, governments and banks completely lose the ability to print money. They can print money if they want, but it won't be worth anything because no one wants to hold onto an arbitrarily inflatable currency when there's a widely accepted alternative without this inherent flaw. It prevents them from collecting tax because the fact that Bitcoin is permissionless and can be used without AML and KYC makes it trivial to hide your economic activity from the tax collectors. The cost of linking transactions to identities becomes prohibitive when everyone's using the system. This means that the success of Bitcoin is the death of the state, at least the death of the state as we know it today. If the state wants money, they'll have to work for it, just like any other participant in the market. No more free rides. The state will do absolutely everything in its power to prevent this. No one should expect this to be easy. At the same time, as I mentioned just before, Bitcoin loses its entire value proposition over the current methods of payment if the state controls it. If you read the white paper carefully and look through Satoshi's forum posts and mailing list posts, he implies that the state is the adversary in the Bitcoin security model. This is also why Satoshi must not only remain anonymous, but also completely disengage. If Satoshi wasn't anonymous or didn't disengage, it would completely undermine Bitcoin's ability to take on an adversary as powerful as a state actor. Bitcoin has 4 modes of operation. The network can go back and forth between these modes of operation. It doesn't have to only go in one direction, and it's not possible to know how long it will spend in each mode. These modes of operation can all be directly derived from the white paper if you read carefully. Right now, we're in the non-threat mode. It's not impacting the government's ability to print money or charge tax. Every new adopter of Bitcoin pushes us closer and closer to governments viewing it as a threat. Governments face constant threats from multiple sources all the time. They can't afford to react on hypothetical future threats. That's why they haven't outlawed Bitcoin yet. Remember what governments want from currency. They want to print money and charge tax. If Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency grows large enough to threaten the government's ability to print money or levy tax, they will respond with laws against it. They'll outlaw it. You'll know when we start entering this mode of operation because they'll start associating Bitcoin with terrorism and stuff like that in order to manufacture consent for outlawing it. Governments will demand changes to the protocol. They'll demand that miners allow the government to mint new coins, and they'll demand that receivers of Bitcoin do not accept coins that don't come from an address that one of the banks or whoever has verified against a real-world identity. Miners and receivers will comply with this, or they'll go to jail. This can't be done without a protocol-level fork. They'll sell this fork as the safe version of Bitcoin, government approved. This, of course, makes government coin just another fiat currency. It loses all of its original value proposition over the existing system. Real Bitcoin will still maintain its original value proposition, but it will move underground because it's criminalized. Large-scale mining will be completely impossible because it's just too easy for governments to discover and shut down and send the operators to jail. Merchants who operate in public will not be able to accept it as payment. Only small-scale operators will be able to hide. This flattens out the landscape and forces decentralization. The smaller you are, the more useful Bitcoin becomes for you during this mode of operation. Bitcoin is not very decentralized today because it doesn't need to be. When it comes under attack, it responds by becoming more decentralized. When it's not under attack, it becomes less decentralized because it's cheaper to run that way. Satoshi talked a lot about this mode of operation, comparing it to the way torrents work. Torrents work by spreading the risk over large numbers of people. The chance for any individual to go to jail is very small. This is how Bitcoin is intended to work when it becomes outlawed. Criminalization will probably fail because the benefits of a currency that isn't controlled by the state outweigh the individual's risk of using it, especially when that risk is spread over a large number of people the way torrents are spread out. Criminalization will kill large miners, but governments aren't going to be able to do anything about half the country mining on their phones while they're charging overnight. At that point, governments must start attacking the network with hash power. They'll try to make the network useless by applying a large amount of hash power, like a 51% attack, but a lot more than that, and mining without actually putting any transactions into the blockchain. Governments have to burn money in order to mine. They can't mine transactions, and so they can't get the transaction fees. They have to mine at a loss. If they mine the transactions, all they're doing is helping Bitcoin. They're actually securing the network, not attacking it. Honest miners are mining for a profit. They can spend money on electricity to mine because they're making an income from mining. Transaction fees will keep climbing until it makes economic sense for enough hash power to come online to beat the government and put transactions into blocks. Or maybe not. Maybe it'll never get there. How high can fees go before it no longer makes economic sense to use Bitcoin? How long can governments dominate the hash rate before they run out of money? It's not clear who will win the hash war, but if Bitcoin gets past outlaw mode of operation, we'll definitely find out.